Hello. Tonight, 6 convenience store night shift stories about customers who seemed to appear without ever coming through the door. If you enjoy quiet stories like these, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from tonight. The first time it happened, I blamed the door sensor. The store sat 12 miles outside a town called Bellwether, New Mexico, where the highway narrowed to one lane in each direction and the desert opened up on both sides. Most people only stopped because they needed gas, coffee, or a bathroom before the next long stretch west. After midnight, there were hours when nobody came in at all. I worked the overnight shift there for almost 2 years. I was 38 then, newly separated, and living in a small rental behind a tire shop in town. The night schedule wasn't something I had planned. It paid a little more, and the quiet suited me better than going home early to rooms that still felt arranged for 2 people. The store was called West Mesa Market, though it was really just a convenience store with 6 gas pumps, 2 aisles of groceries, a wall of refrigerated drinks, and a narrow office in the back. There was no Mesa nearby. The name had been chosen by somebody in Albuquerque who probably never saw the place. The front doors opened automatically during the day. At night, after 1 in the morning, they stayed locked until I pressed a button under the counter. A small black sensor above the glass detected movement outside and gave a soft electronic tone in my headset. I would look at the monitor, see who was there, and unlock the door. That system mattered because I worked alone. My manager, Derek, had told me the rule was simple. After 1, nobody came inside unless I saw them first. The first strange customer appeared on a Tuesday in October, a little after 2 in the morning. I remember the time because I had just finished writing it on the coffee log. We were supposed to replace the regular coffee every 90 minutes, whether anyone bought it or not. I had poured out the old pot, started a fresh one, and written 206 on the clipboard. When I turned around, a man was standing at the register. He was close enough that I stepped back before I could stop myself. He looked to be in his 60s, gray windbreaker, white shirt, dark pants. Nothing unusual about him, except that I had not heard the door tone, and I had not unlocked the door. For a second, I thought he was Derek. Then I saw his face. He had the tired, washed-out look of somebody who had been driving too long. His hair was flattened on one side. There was road dust on the front of his shoes. He set a bottle of water on the counter. "Still take cash?" he asked. I said we did. He handed me 2 $1 bills. While I counted out his change, I kept glancing toward the front door. The lock indicator was still red. I asked if someone had let him in. He looked toward the door, as if he had forgotten it was there. "No," he said. "I just came in." I told him the doors were locked after 1. He gave a small shrug. "Maybe I got here before that." It was such an ordinary answer that I almost accepted it. Except I had been working since 10. I would have remembered a man standing in the store for more than an hour. He took the water and asked one more question before leaving. "County 8 still go through to Mercer?" I told him I didn't think so. County Road 8 was an old 2-lane route south of the highway. Parts of it were paved. Most of it wasn't. I had seen the sign, but I had never driven it. The man nodded, like that confirmed something. Then he walked to the door. I pressed the unlock button. The door opened, and he stepped into the parking lot. The outside motion sensor chimed in my headset as he left. That was the part I remembered later. The sensor worked perfectly when he went out. I watched him cross the lot toward the pumps, but there was no vehicle there except my old Honda under the side light. He kept walking beyond the pumps and disappeared from the parking camera near the highway shoulder. I stood there for a few seconds, then checked the front monitor. Nobody was outside. The highway was empty. At 7, Derek came in with breakfast burritos and complained about the coffee tasting burned. I told him about the man, mostly because I wanted the sensor checked. Derek was 45 and had managed West Mesa Market for 11 years. He wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed strange stories. If the ceiling leaked, he found the pipe. If the register froze, he rebooted it. If somebody claimed a pump charged them twice, he printed the transaction log. He checked the entrance sensor before I left. It worked. Then he pulled up the security footage. We watched the front camera from 1:55 to 2:15. Nobody entered. The doors remained closed the whole time. Derek rewound it twice. On the register camera, I could see myself making coffee at 2:06. At 2:07, I turned around. The man was already standing at the counter. There was no frame showing him walking up. He was simply absent, then present. Derek leaned closer to the screen. "That camera skipped," he said. He checked the timestamp. It had jumped from 2:07:11 to 2:07:18. 7 seconds. That seemed to settle it for him. "Recorder drops frames sometimes when the compressor kicks," he said. "Probably happened on the other camera, too." I asked how the man got through the locked door. Derek looked at me and smiled in a way that meant he thought I was more tired than I realized. "You probably buzzed him in and forgot." For almost 3 weeks, nothing else happened. Then, on a Sunday, near the end of October, a woman appeared near the hot food case. It was 3:14 in the morning. I had been sitting behind the register doing the crossword from the Albuquerque paper. The store was silent, except for the refrigerator fans and the faint tapping noise the ice machine made when it cycled. I looked up because I heard a plastic wrapper move. The woman was standing with her back to me, reading the label on a packaged turkey sandwich. She wore a red cardigan over a pale blouse and had a canvas purse tucked under her arm. Her hair was short and carefully curled. I did not know how long she had been there. The front doors were locked. I checked the monitor. No car at the pumps. No one in the parking lot. The woman brought the sandwich to the counter and placed it beside a small carton of milk. She smiled at me. "You don't sell maps anymore?" I told her we had a few state maps on the rack by the restroom. She shook her head. "Local map." I said I had never seen one. "County roads," she said. "Bellwether to Mercer." That got my attention. I asked if she meant County 8. She looked surprised. "Yes." I told her a man had asked me the same thing a few weeks earlier. Her expression changed, just slightly. Not fear, not recognition exactly. More like she had heard an expected answer. "Did he make it?" she asked. I didn't understand what she meant. "Make it where?" She looked toward the windows. "Mercer." I said I had no idea. She paid with cash, a $5 bill. The paper felt unusually soft, like it had been folded many times. When I opened the drawer, I noticed the design looked older than the other bills inside, but I was not good with money dates and didn't think much of it. Before she left, I asked how she had gotten inside. She laughed once, quietly, through the door. I pressed the unlock button. The front doors slid open. She stepped outside. The motion tone sounded in my headset. I watched her walk toward the edge of the lot. Again, there was no car. The next morning, Derek and I checked the footage. Again, there was a short gap. 5 seconds this time. Before the gap, the aisle was empty. After it, the woman was standing by the sandwiches. The entrance camera showed no movement. Derek replaced the recorder that afternoon. He also replaced the front sensor. For a while, I felt better. A mechanical explanation was comforting because mechanical things could be fixed. The new recorder did not drop frames. I checked. Then a third customer appeared. This one was a young man, maybe 25, wearing a dark green work jacket with reflective strips on the sleeves. It was raining that night, which was unusual enough that I remember the sound of it clearly. The rain came down in brief, hard bursts and left the parking lot black and shining under the canopy lights. At 1:48, I walked to the restroom. The store was empty when I went down the hall. I was gone less than 2 minutes. When I came back, the young man was standing by the coffee station with a paper cup in his hand. My first thought was that Derek had forgotten to lock the side stockroom door. I checked it later. It was locked from the inside. The young man added sugar to his coffee and asked if the payphone still worked. There had not been a payphone outside the store since 2009. I told him we didn't have one. He stared through the window toward the place where the old concrete phone pad was still visible near the ice chest. "That's a problem," he said. I offered to let him use the store phone. He shook his head. No signal past the county line anyway. I asked where he was headed. Mercer. I felt something tighten in my stomach. County 8? He nodded. I told him I didn't think the road went through. He looked at me for several seconds. "Since when?" I said I didn't know. He paid for the coffee with exact change. Before I could ask anything else, headlights appeared outside. An old white pickup rolled into the lot and stopped at pump 4. The young man turned toward it. "That'll be me," he said. I expected him to go out. Instead, he stayed where he was. A woman got out of the pickup and walked toward the store. The motion tone sounded. I buzzed her in. She entered, shook rain from her jacket, and went straight to the restroom. When I looked back toward the coffee station, the young man was gone. The front door had not opened. The stockroom door was still closed. I checked the restroom after the woman came out, empty. The new recorder had not skipped a second. On the center aisle camera, the young man stood at the coffee station at 1:51:03. At 1:51:04, he was gone. No blur, no movement. 1 second he was there. The next second, the space was empty. That was when I stopped blaming equipment. I didn't tell Derek everything the next morning. I only told him somebody had gotten inside again without triggering the sensor. He checked the locks and called the alarm company. They found nothing wrong. For the next week, I changed my routine. I stopped going to the restroom during the shift unless someone else was there. I kept the office door open so I could see the front entrance from the desk. I started writing down the time every time I looked away from the sales floor. The next customer gave me the first useful clue. He appeared at 2:31 on a Thursday in November. Older man, denim shirt, thin gray mustache. He stood near the automotive shelf, holding a bottle of motor oil. He brought the oil to the register and asked if I had a pencil. I handed him one from the lottery station. He picked up a receipt from the trash tray and wrote 3 numbers on the back. 714, he said. 2.6 and 41. I asked what they meant. He slid the receipt toward me. If someone comes looking, tell them those are right. I stared at the numbers. Who's looking? He had already turned toward the door. I did not unlock it. He stopped in front of the glass. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if I refused to let one of them leave. He looked back at me, not angry, just tired. "Ma'am," he said, "I need the road." Something about the way he said it made me press the button. The door opened. He walked out. The motion tone sounded.
He crossed the lot and kept going east along the shoulder.
I kept the receipt. The next day, I asked Derek about County Road 8. He said it had once connected Bellwether to Mercer, a mining settlement about 30 miles south. Mercer's mostly gone now, he said. Couple trailers maybe. Road washed out years ago. I asked when. He shrugged. Before my time. That afternoon, instead of going home, I drove to the county records office. The building was small and cold and smelled like paper dust. A clerk named Marta helped me find old road maps after I told her I was trying to settle an argument. County 8 had been rerouted twice. The older maps showed a direct route south from the highway near the location of West Mesa Market. The road crossed a dry wash, curved through low red hills, and reached Mercer from the north. On a 1987 map, a section had been marked closed. On a 1992 map, the northern half disappeared completely. Marta said a flash flood had destroyed part of it in the late 80s. People still tried to use it for a while, she said. Before GPS, you'd get travelers with old maps. I asked if there had been accidents. She gave me a look that suggested there were accidents on every road in the county. Then I showed her the 3 numbers from the receipt: 714, 2.6, 41. Marta studied them. Could be coordinates, she said. They were not. We tried mile markers, parcel numbers, and survey references. Nothing fit. Then she asked where I had gotten them. I told her a customer had written them down. She looked at the handwriting again. 714 might be a date, she said. July 14th. The second number, 2.6, turned out to match a rainfall total recorded during a storm on July 14th, 1988. The third number took longer. 41 was the number of a highway incident report. The report described a vehicle found abandoned near the north entrance of County Road 8 after a flash flood. Inside the file was a handwritten note from a deputy. Possible driver traveling to Mercer. No occupant located. The missing driver was named Walter Pruitt. The description listed him as 62 years old, gray hair, gray windbreaker, white shirt, dark slacks. I sat very still in the records office. Marta asked if I knew him. I said no. I did not tell her that I had sold him a bottle of water 3 weeks earlier. That should have been enough for me to quit. Instead, I went back to work that night. I had bills. I had no savings worth mentioning. And some stubborn part of me wanted the store to produce a normal customer so I could feel foolish again. For 6 nights, nothing happened. On the 7th, Derek stayed late to help unload a delivery. At 2:20, there were 3 of us in the building. Derek, the delivery driver, and me. I remember thinking that if anyone appeared then, I would finally have another witness. At 2:37, Derek was in the stockroom, counting cigarette cartons. The driver was outside moving cases from the truck. I stood at the register. A woman's voice behind me said, "Excuse me." I turned. The woman in the red cardigan was standing near the coffee station. Same blouse, same canvas purse, same careful curls. She was holding a paper state map. We did sell those, but I had not seen her take one from the rack. I called Derek's name. He answered from the stockroom. "Come up front." The woman watched me without speaking. Derek came out, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What?" I pointed. To her. He looked exactly where I was pointing. Then he looked back at me. "To who?" The woman stood 6 feet from him. She lowered her eyes. That was the moment the whole thing changed for me. Until then, I had thought the cameras were failing to record how these people arrived. Now I understood something else. Sometimes the store recorded them. Sometimes people simply did not. I asked Derek if he saw the map floating in the air. He frowned. "What map?" The woman gave me a tired smile. "I told you," she said. "Local map." Then she placed it on the counter. Derek saw the map after she let go of it. His face changed. He picked it up. It was not a modern state map. It was a folded county road map printed in 1988. A blue line had been drawn from West Mesa Market south along the old route of County 8. At the bottom, near Mercer, someone had written one word: closed. Derek finally believed me. We checked the register camera immediately. The footage showed me speaking to an empty space near the coffee station. Derek walked into frame. I pointed. Then the old map appeared on the counter. No hand placed it there. No woman was visible. Derek watched that sequence 4 times. He did not say the recorder was broken. The next morning, he called the owner and told him we needed 2 people on nights until further notice. The owner refused. Derek moved me to days. I thought that would end it. For a while, it did. Then, 3 months later, Derek called me at home. He had taken one of the overnight shifts himself because the new clerk was sick. At 3:02 in the morning, a customer had appeared beside the freezer without coming through the door. Derek could see him. The cameras could see him too. He bought a coffee and asked whether County 8 still reached Mercer. Derek told him the road was closed. The customer said, "I know. That's why we keep ending up here." Before he left, he gave Derek a small brass key. The tag attached to it read, "West Mesa Storage." There was no storage room with that name. The next day, Derek and I searched the back of the building. Behind a row of shelving in the stockroom, we found an old interior door that had been covered by plywood and painted the same beige as the wall. Derek had managed the store 11 years and never noticed it. We removed the plywood. The brass key opened the lock. The room behind it was narrow and empty, except for a metal desk and 2 cardboard boxes. Inside the boxes were old business records from the station that had occupied the property before West Mesa Market was built. Fuel receipts, repair invoices, employee schedules, and a stack of handwritten incident logs from the late 80s. The old station had stayed open 24 hours. During storms, travelers sometimes stopped there to ask about County 8. One entry from July 15th, 1988, was underlined twice. 4 vehicles failed to return after being directed south toward Mercer before road closure confirmed. A second note had been added in different handwriting. "If anyone asks tonight, tell them the North Road is closed." Derek sat at the desk for a long time without speaking. Then he opened the final incident log. Most pages were blank. On the first written page was a date from 3 weeks after the flood. Customer inside at 2:12. Did not hear door. Asked for Mercer. 2 pages later, another entry. Woman inside at 3:10. No car. Asked for map. The entries continued for years. Not every week. Not every month. Always at night. Always people asking about the same road. Some descriptions matched the customers I had seen. Some did not. The last entry had been written in 1996. It said only, "They are not trying to get in. They are trying to leave from the right place." Derek wanted to call the owner. I asked him not to. I still cannot fully explain why. Maybe because the records had already been sitting there for decades, through remodels, ownership changes, new cameras, new locks, and new employees. Whatever was happening had outlasted everyone who tried to document it. We put the boxes back in the room, but we left the old county map taped beside the register. On it, we marked County Road 8, closed, in thick black ink. We also wrote a second route to Mercer, using the modern highway. For the next few months, the night staff were told that if anyone asked for Mercer, they should point to the map and say the old road was closed. No jokes, no questions, just directions. The customers stopped appearing as often. By the time I left West Mesa Market the following summer, I had seen 2 more. Both came in without triggering the entrance sensor. Both asked about County 8. Both studied the map for a long time. And both left through the front door after I showed them the new route. I never saw Walter Pruitt again. I never saw the woman in the red cardigan again, either. Years later, Derek called to tell me West Mesa Market had been torn down after the owner sold the property. A larger travel center was built half a mile east. The old foundation was removed. The storage room was gone. The road sign for County 8 was taken down. For a while, I assumed that was the end of it. Then last November, I drove through Bellwether on my way to Arizona. It was after midnight. I stopped at the new travel center for coffee. The building was bright, crowded, and nothing like the old store. There were 12 pumps, a fast food counter, and music playing softly above the aisles. I stood in line behind a truck driver and 2 college students. When it was my turn, the cashier looked tired. He rang up my coffee, handed me the receipt, and glanced toward the entrance. Then he asked another employee a question. "Did you see that guy come in?" The other employee said no. I turned around. Near the bottled water, an older man in a gray windbreaker was reading a road map. He looked up at me once. Then he looked toward the south windows. The woman was standing beside the freezer when I looked up, but the door counter still said 0. That was what bothered me first. Not her clothes, not the way she kept looking past the windows toward a road that had been renamed years ago. Just the small red number on the occupancy display above the office door. It was supposed to count every person who came in after midnight. When someone entered, it went up by 1. When they left, it went down. That night, it stayed at 0 until she walked out. Then it changed to -1. I was 34 and working overnights at a place called North Shore Stop in Merrow Bay, a small town in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The store sat 2 blocks from Lake Superior, close enough that winter wind pushed fine snow across the parking lot, even when the sky was clear. I had grown up in Merrow Bay, left at 22, and spent most of the next decade telling people I would never move back. Then the restaurant I had opened with a friend in Grand Rapids failed. There was nothing dramatic about it. No scandal, no fire. We simply ran out of money in a slower, more embarrassing way. I sold my share for less than I had put into it, moved home with boxes I had not unpacked in years, and took the night job because it let me avoid most people who remembered what I had once said I was going to become. North Shore Stop was an ordinary convenience store. 6 pumps, coffee, beer, frozen pizza, a small hot food case that shut down at 10. The building had been remodeled twice, but the oldest part dated to the 1970s. The occupancy counter was newer. Our owner had installed it after the fire marshal complained that weekend fishing tournaments brought too many people inside at once. 2 small sensors above the front doors counted movement in both directions. During the day, Nobody paid much attention to the number. At night, I did. It gave me a quick way to know whether someone was still in the store when I went to the stockroom or restroom. The woman appeared in late January, during the coldest week of that winter. It was around 2:40 in the morning. The roads were empty, and I had not had a customer in almost an hour. I was sitting on a milk crate behind the counter, counting scratch-off tickets, when I heard the freezer door close. I looked up. She was maybe 60, short gray hair, navy wool coat, brown gloves. She was standing in front of the frozen meals, with one hand resting on the glass. The occupancy display read 0. I assumed the sensor had missed her. That happened occasionally if two people came through close together, but nobody else had been there. She chose a frozen chicken dinner and brought it to the register. "Do you still have the bakery on Larch?" she asked. I thought I had misheard her. "What bakery?" "On Larch Avenue." "There's no Larch Avenue here." She looked toward the front windows. "Of course there is." I told her there was a Larch Road outside town, but no Larch Avenue in Marrow Bay. She gave me a patient smile. "It runs behind the old library." The old library had been torn down before I was born. I knew that because my father used to talk about it. The current library stood beside the high school on Harbor Street. I rang up the dinner. The woman paid cash. Before leaving, she asked if the bakeries stayed open past 6. I said I did not know what place she meant. She studied me for a moment. Then she said, "You look like the woman who owns it." I laughed because I did not know what else to do. She did not. When she walked through the front doors, the exit sensor chimed. The occupancy display changed from 0 to -1. I stared at it until the red number looked wrong in a way that was hard to explain. At 5, I reset the counter. By 6, I had convinced myself the sensors needed service. The next afternoon, our manager, Joel, checked them. Joel was younger than me, but had worked at North Shore Stop since high school. He cleaned both lenses, ran in and out of the store several times, and watched the number change correctly every time. Then we checked the video. The front camera showed the doors from the inside. At 2:39, the store was empty. At 2:41, I was still behind the register, looking down at the lottery tickets. The woman was already standing by the freezer. There was no frame of her entering. There was no gap in the timestamp either. Joel rewound the clip. "Maybe she came in earlier," he said. "We went back 20 minutes. No woman. 30 minutes. Still no woman." At 2:40 and 12 seconds, the freezer aisle was empty. At 2:40 and 13 seconds, she was there. Joel watched that second twice. Then he shrugged. Compression glitch. I asked if compression glitches could make the door counter go negative. He said the two systems were separate. That answer should have made me feel better. It did not. 4 nights later, a man appeared near the beer cooler. He was in his 40s, wearing a green knit cap and a work jacket with a patch over the chest that read, "Marrow Bay Electric." There was no company by that name. Our electricity came from a regional cooperative with trucks that had blue logos. The man carried 2 bottles of orange soda to the counter. He looked around the store as if he had expected it to be arranged differently. "When did you move the counter?" he asked. I told him it had been in the same place for years. "No," he said. "It used to be along that wall." He pointed toward the magazine rack. I said maybe he was thinking of another store. He gave me a distracted nod. Then he looked at my name tag. Claire Morley. That was my name. He smiled slightly. "You're not at the bakery tonight?" I stopped scanning the soda. "What bakery?" Harbor Bread? The name meant nothing to me. He seemed embarrassed. Sorry, wrong person. He paid with a $10 bill. When I handed him the change, I noticed something folded under his arm. It was a local newspaper. The masthead said Morro Bay Sentinel. Our paper was called the Bay County Ledger. I asked where he got it. He looked down like he had forgotten he was carrying it. At home? Can I see it? He hesitated, then handed it to me. The date was that day. The front page showed the same lake, the same courthouse, and the same snowstorm we had been having all week. But several names were wrong. Our mayor was not the person named in the article. The high school mascot was called the Mariners instead of the Huskies. There was a small advertisement at the bottom of the page. Harbor Bread, fresh loaves daily, Larch Avenue, across from the old library. The man saw my face. Something wrong? I asked if I could keep the paper. He looked toward the doors. I suppose. Then he left. The counter changed from 0 to -1 again. I put the newspaper under the register. At 7, I showed it to Joel. He thought it was a joke. Then he read the articles. The paper felt real. The ink came off slightly on his fingers. The sports page listed scores from games that had actually happened the night before. But one team name was different. Joel called the Ledger office. Nobody there had heard of the Morro Bay Sentinel. He called the number in the Harbor Bread advertisement. A recorded voice said the number was not in service. Then he checked the address. There was no Larch Avenue. He still believed somebody was messing with us. I wanted to believe that too. So I started writing things down. Not because I thought I was seeing ghosts. I did not. I thought I was tired. The failure of my restaurant had left me sleeping badly. I was working nights. I was drinking too much coffee. It seemed possible that I was giving ordinary mistakes more importance than they deserved. For almost 2 weeks, nothing else happened. The occupancy counter behaved normally. Customers entered through the door and left through the door. Then a college-aged woman appeared at the coffee station at 3:17 in the morning. No entrance tone, no increase on the counter. She wore a dark red parka and had snow in her hair, even though it had stopped snowing hours earlier. She filled a cup with coffee and asked where we kept the cinnamon rolls. I pointed to the pastry rack. She looked confused. They used to be from Harbor Bread. I did not answer. She noticed. Did they stop delivering? I asked what year she thought it was. She looked at me carefully. Then she said the correct year. That frightened me more than if she had given me a date from the past. I asked whether Larch Avenue existed. Behind the library, she said. I asked who owned Harbor Bread. She took a sip of coffee. You do. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she laughed once. Sorry, you look exactly like her. I asked her to wait. I went to the office and brought out the newspaper. The moment she saw it, her expression changed. Where did you get that? A customer left it. She touched the masthead with one finger. That's yesterday's paper. I told her it did not exist here. She looked toward the windows. There were no cars outside. What do you mean, here? She asked. I wish I had a better answer. Instead, I said, How did you come in? She turned toward the door. For the first time, she seemed unsettled. I parked out front. There was no car. She walked to the glass, looked into the parking lot, and stopped. My car was right there. She pointed at pump 3. The snow around it was smooth and unbroken. She did not panic. That made the whole thing worse. She only stood there with her coffee in both hands, staring outside. Then she asked if there was another door. I told her there was a stockroom exit, but it opened into the alley. She asked me to show her. I almost did. Then I remembered the paper, the strange addresses, and the occupancy count going negative whenever one of them left. I had the strong feeling that letting her use a different door would be a mistake. I told her the front was the only public exit. She nodded slowly. Before leaving, she looked at me again. "You really aren't Claire from Harbor Bread?" I said no. She gave me an odd, sad smile. "You even sound like her." Then she walked out. The counter changed to -1. That time, I did not reset it. I left the number on the display and called Joel. He came in before sunrise wearing sweatpants under his winter coat, annoyed until he saw the red -1 above the office door. We tested the sensors together. I stepped outside. The number went to -2. I came back in. It returned to -1. Joel did the same thing and got the same result. The counter was not frozen. It was counting correctly from the wrong starting point. He called the company that had installed it. A technician named Marcy came out that afternoon with a laptop and a small ladder. She spent nearly an hour checking the sensors, the wiring, and the event log stored in the controller. I expected her to find a reset error. Instead, she asked us how many doors the building had. Joel told her 2, the customer entrance and the stockroom exit. Marcy shook her head. "The controller has 3 zones." She turned the laptop so we could see. Zone 1 was the front entrance. Zone 2 was the stockroom door. Zone 3 had no label. The strange part was that Zone 3 had recorded activity. Not often. 5 events in the previous 6 weeks. Every one of them happened between 2 and 4 in the morning. Every event registered a person moving into the store. None registered that person leaving through the same zone. The times matched the nights I had seen the strange customers. The woman by the freezer. The man with the newspaper. The college student with snow in her hair. Marcy checked the controller twice. "There is no third sensor connected," she said. Joel asked if old wiring could be sending false signals. She disconnected the unused terminals, cleared the log, and reset the system to 0. Before she left, she wrote the service number on a card and taped it beside the display. "If it happens again, don't reset it," she said. "Call me first." That night, at 2:58, I was alone behind the register when the display changed from 0 to 1. The front doors did not open. The stockroom door did not move. I watched the aisles for almost a minute and saw nobody. Then I heard someone turn a page near the coffee station. A man I had never seen was standing there, reading the Marrow Bay Sentinel. I called Marcy before I spoke to him. She answered on the 4th ring. I told her the counter had changed. She logged into the controller remotely from home. For a few seconds, all I heard was the refrigerator hum and the soft movement of paper from the coffee station. Then she said, "Zone 3 again." I asked if she could tell where Zone 3 was. "No," she said. "There is nothing connected to it." The man folded his newspaper and brought a pack of gum to the counter. I did not ask him about Larch Avenue. I only watched the red number above the office door. When he left through the front entrance, it went back to 0. Marcy was still on the phone. She had seen both events happen in real time. After a long silence, she said, "I'm going to mark that controller for replacement." The next morning, I asked my mother whether there had ever been a plan for Larch Avenue. She was quiet for a while. Then she asked where I had heard the name. I told her a customer mentioned it. My mother said that when she was a child, the town had planned to extend a street behind the old library. The project was canceled after a funding dispute. She thought the proposed name had been Larch Avenue. That sent me to the county planning office. A clerk found the original redevelopment map from 1976. There it was, Larch Avenue. It would have run exactly where the customers described it. The map showed a row of small commercial lots along the new street. One lot, number 12, had been designated for a bakery. The project never happened. The old library was demolished a few years later. The land became a parking area, then part of a school bus turnaround. I asked whether anyone had ever proposed the name Harbor Bread. The clerk said no. I drove home and slept for 3 hours. When I woke, I opened the Sentinel again. This time I read every page. On page 6, there was a short business article about winter sales downtown. Harbor Bread was mentioned in the second paragraph. The owner's name was Claire Morley. My name. There was a photograph. The woman in it looked like me. Not exactly. Her hair was shorter. She was heavier through the face. She wore round glasses I had never owned. But it was me closely enough that I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time without moving. The caption said Harbor Bread had been open for 11 years. 11 years earlier, I had been 23. That was the year I had left Merrow Bay for Grand Rapids. The article said I had opened the bakery after completing a culinary program in Traverse City. I had applied to that program when I was 22. I did not go. I chose a different school farther south because I wanted distance from home. That was the first time I stopped thinking the customers were simply from another town. They were from a town that had made slightly different choices. And somehow, so had I. I did not tell Joel about the photograph. I kept the newspaper in my apartment. For the next month, I volunteered for every overnight shift I could get. That is the part I am least proud of. I told myself I was trying to understand what was happening. The truth was simpler. I wanted another customer to arrive. I wanted to ask about the bakery. I wanted to know whether the other version of me was happy. The next strange customer came during a thaw in early March. He was an older man with a canvas shopping bag and a damp brown coat. I found him standing near the bread shelf. The occupancy counter read 0. He picked up a loaf, squeezed it gently, and frowned. "Not yours," he said. I asked what he meant. He looked at my name tag. Then he looked at my face. "Claire?" I said yes. He smiled. "I thought you worked mornings." I told him I wanted to ask him something. He seemed confused, but waited. "Harbor Bread," I said. "Do I own it?" His smile faded. "Of course. Is it doing well?" He studied me with the cautious expression people use when they suspect a joke. "Far as I know." "Am I happy there?" He did not answer immediately. Then he said, "You're there every day." It was not the answer I wanted. I asked if I had a family. He looked away. "I don't know you that well." I almost apologized. Instead, I asked how he had entered the store. "Front door." "Did you drive here?" He pointed toward the pumps. There was a dark sedan at pump 5. For the first time, one of them had a car outside. I looked at the occupancy counter. 0. Then I looked back at the parking lot. The sedan was still there. I made a decision that I still think about. I told the man to wait. I walked around the counter and went outside. The automatic doors opened for me. The cold air smelled like melting snow and gasoline. The sedan at Pump 5 had Michigan plates. The registration sticker was current. There was nothing unusual about it. But the gas pump display was wrong. The price per gallon was lower than it should have been. Not by much, 23 cents. I looked toward the highway. Across the road, where our town had a dentist's office and an empty lot, there was a 2-story brick building with warm windows. A sign above the door said, Marrow Bay Public Library. The old library, still standing. Behind it, a narrow street ran downhill toward the lake. The street sign read, Larch Avenue. Halfway down the block, under a yellow awning, was a bakery, Harbor Bread. I could see people moving inside. I stood in the parking lot for maybe 5 seconds, maybe less. Then the older man opened the store door behind me. "You coming?" he asked. I knew what he meant, even though he had no reason to ask it that way. I could have crossed the road. The bakery was close enough that I could see a woman behind the counter through the front window. She had short hair, round glasses. She turned her head slightly. I could not see her face clearly. I thought about the restaurant I had lost. I thought about the years I had spent believing that one failed plan had explained something permanent about me. Then I thought about my apartment, my mother, Joel, the store, and every ordinary thing that would still exist if I walked back inside. I did not know what would happen if I crossed the road. I only knew I had never seen one of those customers arrive. I had only ever seen them leave. So I went back into North Shore Stop. The older man looked disappointed, but not surprised. He bought the loaf of bread. Then he left. The occupancy counter changed to -1. When I looked through the windows again, the old library was gone. The dentist's office was back. The lot beside it was empty. There was no Larch Avenue. I quit the overnight shift 2 weeks later. I did not quit the store. I moved to mornings. A few months after that, I started baking again. Nothing ambitious. Bread at home first, then cinnamon rolls for a church sale. Later, I rented a shelf at the Saturday market. I never opened Harbor Bread. I do not know if I ever will. The strange customers stopped appearing to me once I moved off nights. Joel said the occupancy counter still went negative sometimes after 2 in the morning. He had learned to reset it without asking questions. Last winter, North Shore Stop replaced the old front doors during another remodel. The new system does not display a customer count where employees can see it. But the old red counter is still in the back office, disconnected from everything. Joel sent me a picture of it in February. The store was closed for the night because of a power outage. Every sensor in the building was dark. The red display was still glowing. It read -3.
By the third customer, I had stopped checking the front door. I started writing down what they bought instead. The store was called Cedar Vale Quick Stop, though there was no cedar anywhere near it. It sat at the edge of a small town in western Pennsylvania, between a shuttered furniture factory and a 2-lane road that climbed into the hills. The building was square, low, and always a little too warm inside during winter. I was 47 when I started working nights there in 2018. I had managed the place for almost 6 years, but I had always worked days until my wife died. After that, mornings became difficult in a way I did not know how to explain. People came in carrying coffee, talking about school buses and appointments and what they planned to do before dinner. Everything about daylight seemed to assume you had somewhere to go next. Nights did not ask as much. At 11, the traffic thinned. By 1, I mostly saw truck drivers, hospital employees, and people coming home from bars in the next county. Between 2 and 4, there could be an hour when the only sound in the store was the refrigeration system and the little relay clicking above the lottery display. The front door had an old magnetic chime that made 2 notes whenever it opened. I heard those notes in my sleep for years. The first customer I did not see came in late February. It was a Wednesday, a little after 2 in the morning. Freezing rain had started around midnight and then stopped, leaving the parking lot black and shiny under the canopy lights. I was behind the counter adding up the cigarette count when a man said, "Do you have a longer one?" I looked up. He was standing beside the rack of phone chargers. He looked about 30, brown work jacket, orange knit cap, mud dried along the bottom of his jeans. He was holding a short charging cable in one hand. I had not heard the door. That was unusual, but not impossible. The chime sometimes failed if the door did not close all the way after someone came through. I told him the 6-foot cables were on the bottom hook. He crouched, found one, and brought it to the counter with a black coffee. While I rang him up, he glanced toward the entrance. "Good," he said. "You moved that yellow sign." I looked where he was looking. Our yellow wet floor sign was folded beside the ice freezer, where it had been all night. "What sign?" I asked. "The one by the drain." There was a floor drain just inside the entrance. In winter, melted snow collected there and sometimes froze when cold air came through the door. I told him I had not put a sign there. He stared at the empty patch of tile for a second. "Must have been somewhere else," he said. He paid cash. The receipt printed at 2:16 a.m. Before he left, he asked if the road toward Weller Ridge was still icy. I said I had not been up that way. He nodded, carried his coffee to the door, and pushed it open. The chime sounded twice. I watched him cross the parking lot toward a dark pickup parked beside Pump 4. That bothered me more than missing the door chime. I could see the pumps from the counter. I had not noticed a truck pull in. Still, I found an explanation. I had been counting inventory. I had been tired. The freezer compressors were loud. The man had probably entered while I was looking down and parked where one of the window signs blocked my view. I went back to the cigarette count. At 3, I stepped around the counter to mop the entrance. The drain had a thin rim of ice around it. I unfolded the yellow sign and set it beside the wet tile. Then I forgot about the man. The next night, at 2:17, the door chime sounded. The same man walked in. Same brown jacket, same orange cap, same mud on his jeans. He went directly to the phone chargers. I remember feeling annoyed before I felt anything else. I thought he had forgotten something and come back a day later. Then he picked up the short cable and called toward the counter. "Do you have a longer one?" I did not answer right away. He looked at me. 6-foot ones are on the bottom, I said. He crouched. He found one. Then he poured a black coffee. When he came to the register, he glanced toward the entrance. The yellow wet floor sign was standing beside the drain. "Good," he said. "You moved that yellow sign." I stopped with my hand over the register keys. He looked at me like he was waiting for the total. I asked if he had been in the store the night before. "No." "You sure?" He smiled a little. "I'm pretty sure I know where I was last night." I described his purchase. He laughed. "That's what I'm buying now." He paid cash. The receipt printed at 2:17 a.m. Before leaving, he asked if the road toward Weller Ridge was still icy. I told him it was. He nodded, carried his coffee outside, and got into a dark pickup at Pump 4. This time, I had heard the truck arrive. I had watched it pull under the canopy less than a minute before he came through the door. I kept both receipts. The first was dated February 21st. The second was dated February 22nd. Same items, same total, different transaction numbers. At 7, when Denise arrived, I showed them to her. Denise had worked at Cedar Vale longer than I had. She was 59, practical, and suspicious of any explanation that required more than one coincidence. She looked at the receipts and asked why I had saved the first one. I told her the customer had seemed familiar. I did not tell her the rest. Not yet. The second customer appeared 4 nights later. She was already standing in front of the medicine shelf when I came out of the back office. The front door had not chimed. She wore a green coat and had rain beaded across the shoulders, though the parking lot outside was dry. Her hair was tied back with a gray scarf. She picked up a bottle of antacid and a small package of peppermint gum. At the register, she asked whether Pump 2 was taking cards again. I told her it was. She frowned toward the window. It kept rejecting mine. There was no vehicle at Pump 2. I told her maybe she had the wrong pump. She seemed embarrassed. "Long day," she said. She paid with a 20. Her receipt printed at 1:43 a.m. I wrote the time on the back after she left. Then I wrote down everything I could remember. Green coat, gray scarf, antacid, peppermint gum, Pump 2 card reader. I put the note in my wallet. The next night, at 1:44, a silver sedan pulled up to Pump 2. The driver inserted a card. The pump screen flashed red. She tried again. Then she came inside. Green coat, gray scarf, same woman. The door chime sounded when she entered. I watched her go to the medicine shelf. She picked up the antacid, then the peppermint gum. When she reached the register, she said, "Is Pump 2 taking cards again?" I felt the skin along my arms tighten. I asked if she had been there the previous night. She looked confused. "No." I asked where she had been. "Pittsburgh." She said it without hesitation. I took the note from my wallet and set it beside the register. She read it. Her face changed. "You wrote this about me?" I told her I had written it the night before. She gave the paper back. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she looked through the windows at her car. "I wasn't anywhere near here last night," she said. I believed her. That was when I told Denise the whole story. She listened with her arms folded and did not interrupt. When I finished, she said I needed more sleep. I said I probably did. Then I asked her to help me prove I was wrong. For the next week, I kept a small spiral notebook under the register. If somebody appeared without the door chime, I wrote down the time, what they wore, what they bought, and anything unusual they said. I did not change the note later. I signed the page and put a strip of clear tape across the writing. Denise checked it in the morning. Nothing happened for 3 nights. On the 4th, a man in a Navy mechanic's jacket appeared beside the coffee counter at 3:06. He bought 2 bottles of water and a pack of powdered donuts. He asked if we had fixed the light over Pump 6. The light was working. I wrote everything down after he left. The following morning, Denise read the note. The next night, she came in early and sat in the office where she could see the register through the glass. At 3:07, a white van pulled up to Pump 6. The canopy light above it flickered twice and went out. A man in a Navy mechanic's jacket came through the door. He bought 2 bottles of water and a pack of powdered donuts. Then he asked me if we had fixed the light over Pump 6. Denise heard him. After he left, she took the notebook into the office and closed the door. She stayed in there almost 10 minutes. When she came out, she said, "Show me the other receipts." From then on, we called them tomorrow customers. It was Denise's phrase, not mine. At first, the rule seemed simple. A person would appear inside the store without the entrance chime. About 24 hours later, they would arrive normally. They wore the same clothes. They bought the same things. They usually repeated 1 or 2 sentences almost exactly. The time was never perfect. Sometimes the second visit was a minute later. Once, it was 3 minutes earlier. But it was always the next night. We never saw more than 1 tomorrow customer during a shift, and they never seemed to know they had been there before. Denise wanted to tell our owner. I did not. I knew how it would sound. More than that, I had started to find the pattern useful. That is the part I am least comfortable admitting. One tomorrow customer complained about a loose metal strip near the front mat. I fixed it before his ordinary visit the next night. Another said the coffee tasted burnt. I replaced the machine filter before she came back. A man in a red sweatshirt asked why we had boxes stacked beside the emergency exit. There were no boxes there when he first appeared. The next afternoon, a delivery came early, and the driver started leaving cases in that exact place. I made him move them. When the red sweatshirt man arrived normally that night, the exit was clear. He never mentioned the boxes. That was the first time the second visit changed. It was also when I began to understand that we were not watching something fixed. We were being shown something that could still move. For a while, that made the whole thing less frightening. It felt almost practical. Then, in the middle of March, a Tomorrow customer failed to return. He had appeared at 2:31 on a Monday morning. Older man, tan coat, wire-frame glasses. He bought a newspaper and a small carton of milk. Before leaving, he looked at me for a long moment and said, "You ought to call her before she gets here." I asked who he meant. He gave me a tired smile. "You know." Then he left. The next night, I waited for him. 2:31 passed, then 2:40, then 3. He never came. I checked the newspaper shelf. Nothing missing. Denise said maybe he had taken another route. I said maybe, but I kept thinking about what he had said. Call her before she gets here. There was only one person I could connect to that sentence. My daughter, Rachel. Rachel was 26 then and living outside Pittsburgh. We were not exactly estranged. That word makes it sound like there had been one fight big enough to explain everything. There had not. After my wife, Ellen, died, I became quiet in a way that made other people do all the work of staying close to me. Rachel called. I answered. She invited me to things. I found reasons not to go. Eventually, she called less often. By the time I moved to nights, we could go a month without speaking, and both pretend that was normal. I had thought about calling her many times. I had also thought about fixing the garage door, repainting the kitchen, and sorting through Ellen's clothes. Thinking was easy. I did none of those things. 2 nights after the man in the tan coat failed to return, Rachel walked into Cedar Vale Quick Stop. Except she did not come through the door. I was carrying a case of bottled tea from the stockroom when I saw her standing near the phone accessories. For a second, I did not recognize her because I had not seen her in person for almost a year. Her hair was shorter. She wore a blue coat I had never seen. She was holding a phone charger. I set the case down. "Rachel," she looked over. "Dad." Not surprised, not confused, just tired. I asked how she had gotten there. She glanced toward the entrance. "Through the door." I had not heard it. There was no car outside. She brought the charger to the counter. "My phone died," she said. "I almost kept driving." I asked where she was going. She gave me a strange look. "Here." "Why?" "Because you called." I had not called her. I felt something shift in me then. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. The old man's sentence came back word for word. "You ought to call her before she gets here." Rachel set the charger on the counter. I asked what I had said when I called. She rubbed her thumb along the edge of the package. "You said you were tired of waiting for a good reason." That sounded like something I might say. It also sounded like something I had never been brave enough to say. I asked when I called. "Yesterday afternoon." Then she looked at me more closely. "You okay?" I told her I was fine. That was a lie, but not a dangerous one. I rang up the charger. She paid cash because in whatever version of Tomorrow I was looking at, her phone was dead and her wallet was still full of crumpled bills. Before she left, she said, "I can stay for breakfast if you want." I said yes. She smiled. Then she walked out. The door chime sounded. The parking lot was empty after she crossed it. I stood behind the counter until almost 4 without moving the case of bottled tea from the floor. The next afternoon, I called Rachel. She answered on the 4th ring. "Dad." I had planned a sentence. I forgot it. So I said the first true thing I could think of. I'm tired of waiting for a good reason to call you. There was a long silence. Then she said, "That's a weird thing to say." I laughed. So did she. We talked for 20 minutes. She told me she had a meeting the next day in a town west of us and would be driving back late. Cedar Vale was not exactly on the way. It was close enough. I asked if she wanted to stop by. She said, maybe. The next night, I kept looking at the clock. At 2:48, a blue sedan pulled into the parking lot. I knew the car. Ellen had helped Rachel buy it after college. The door chime sounded. Rachel came inside wearing the blue coat. Her phone was in her hand, working. She walked directly to the counter. "You look terrible," she said. I told her night shift did that. She said she almost kept driving. Then she smiled. "But you called." The phone charger was still hanging on the rack. She did not need it. That small difference mattered to me more than anything else. We stood there talking for a while. Nothing important at first. Her job, the drive, a leak in her apartment ceiling. The kind of things we should have been talking about all along. Then, while she was telling me about a coworker, she stopped. "Did that guy come in with me?" I turned. An older man was standing beside the refrigerated sandwiches, tan coat, wire frame glasses, the man who had failed to return. I had not heard the door chime a second time. Rachel had not seen him enter either. He picked up a newspaper and a small carton of milk. Then he came to the counter. He looked at Rachel, then at me. "Good," he said. That was all. He paid cash. I did not ask him any questions. I was afraid that if I did, I would turn the moment into another puzzle and miss what was already in front of me. He carried the paper and milk outside. The chime sounded when he left. Rachel watched the empty parking lot through the window. "Where's his car?" she asked. I said I did not know. She looked at me. For once, I did not try to explain it away. We had breakfast at a diner after my shift. I took the following night off. It was the first overnight shift I had missed in more than a year. Denise covered for me. At 2:33 in the morning, the man in the tan coat arrived normally. She told me about it later. He came through the front door. The chime sounded. He bought a newspaper and a small carton of milk. Then he looked at the empty space behind the register and asked, "Tom finally take the night off?" Denise said yes. He nodded. "Good," he said. Then he left. I stayed on nights for another 2 months. The tomorrow customers kept coming, though less often. By then, Denise and I had stopped trying to understand why the store did it. We only wrote things down when they seemed useful. A broken light, a blocked aisle, a customer who would need jumper cables, a woman who would ask to use the phone because she had locked hers in the car. Small things, ordinary things. That was what made the whole experience stay with me. Nothing the tomorrow customers showed us was grand enough to feel like prophecy. Most of it was the kind of information you would ignore if you heard it from the right person at the right time. Move the sign, fix the light, clear the exit, make the call. I transferred to days that summer. Rachel and I did not become suddenly close. Real relationships do not repair themselves as neatly as stories do, but we kept talking. I drove to Pittsburgh twice that year. She came home for Thanksgiving. The following spring, we finally sorted Ellen's clothes together. Cedar Vale. Quick Stop changed owners in 2021. The new company replaced the counter, the floor tiles, the coffee machines, and the old magnetic door chime. Denise retired a few months later. Before she left, she mailed me the little spiral notebook we had kept under the register. I still have it. Most of the pages are boring if you do not know what they mean. Blue jacket, 2 waters, donuts, green coat, antacid, gum, red sweatshirt, regular coffee, Rachel, blue coat, charger. I read that page sometimes, not because I am afraid of it, because it reminds me that a future can arrive quietly before you have decided whether you want it. The new owners say the replacement door chime works perfectly. Denise knows one of the current clerks and still talks to her now and then. Last Christmas, she called me after midnight. She said the clerk had asked her a strange question. Sometimes, during the slowest part of the night, the new chime sounds once when the doors are closed. There is never anyone outside. The clerk has started writing down the time. The customer usually comes in the next night. The chime just rings a day early. The first customer nobody remembered was an older man in a tan raincoat. I remembered him because he walked across a section of floor I had just cleaned, and his shoes left 4 dark prints in the wax. The prints began beside the beer cooler. There were none between the front door and the cooler. None near the restroom. None by the side entrance. Just 4 wet marks appearing in the middle of a dry aisle, then a faint trail toward the register after he started walking. At the time, I thought I had missed something obvious. I was 49 that summer, working nights for a floor care company out of Memphis. We cleaned grocery stores, pharmacies, convenience stores, and any other place that wanted polished tile without closing during the day. The work was simple once you learned the machines. Sweep, scrub, rinse, let the floor dry, lay down finish if the job called for it. The store that bothered me was called Cypress Bell Market, outside a small Arkansas town named Helena Junction. It sat beside a state highway between soybean fields and a drainage canal. There were 8 pumps under a wide canopy, 2 soda fountains, a roller grill, and 1 long wall of refrigerated cases that hummed louder after midnight. I worked there 3 nights a week from 1 until 5. The night cashier was a woman named Maya Collins. She was 30, maybe a little younger, and studying bookkeeping through an online program. We got along because neither of us talked much while we worked. She did school assignments between customers. I pushed an automatic scrubber up and down the aisles with foam earplugs hanging around my neck. I had taken the job after my own cleaning business failed. By the time I shut it down, I had spent almost a year avoiding people who knew me well enough to ask real questions. Working for someone else at night was easier. Nobody at Cypress Bell knew I had once had employees of my own. To Maya, I was Leon from the cleaning company. To the store manager, I was the floor contractor. To the drivers who brought milk and bread before sunrise, I was the guy with the machine. I preferred it that way. The man in the tan raincoat appeared a little after 2:15 on a Tuesday in July. It had not rained that night. The air outside was hot enough that the windows had a pale film of condensation around the edges. I had just finished the aisle between the beer cooler and the chips. The tile was clean and dull, waiting for the last pass of the buffer. I turned the machine around near the coffee station. The man was standing beside the cooler. He looked about 70. Thin face, white hair combed straight back, tan raincoat buttoned to the throat, even though it was close to 80 degrees outside. I knew I had not seen him walk in because the front entrance was directly in front of me. The doors made a soft hydraulic sigh whenever they opened. Even with the scrubber running, I usually noticed the change in light from the parking lot. Still, people can miss things. I moved the machine aside and told him the floor was damp. He looked down at his shoes. "Sorry," he said. His voice was low and perfectly ordinary. He picked up a bottle of root beer and carried it to the counter. Maya rang him up. I saw her ask if he wanted a bag. He said no. She gave him change from a 10. Before he left, he looked back at me. "Do you work here every night?" he asked. I told him only 3 nights a week. He nodded, as if that answer mattered. Then he went out through the front doors. I watched the glass close behind him. There was no car at the pumps. He walked toward the highway and passed beyond the light from the canopy. A few minutes later, I returned to the wet aisle. That was when I saw the footprints, 4 of them near the cooler. Then a gap where he had stepped onto dry tile. I stood with the mop handle in my hand and looked toward the entrance. There should have been prints coming from the door. There were not. I asked Maya if the man had come in before I started that aisle. She looked up from her laptop. What man? I thought she was joking. The guy in the raincoat. She stared at me for a second. Then she looked toward the doors. I didn't see anybody in a raincoat. I reminded her that she had sold him a root beer. Maya smiled. Leon, I haven't had a customer since that nurse bought cigarettes. That had been almost 40 minutes earlier. I walked to the counter and asked her to check the last sale. She did. The screen showed one bottle of root beer, paid in cash, at $2.18. Maya stared at it. I don't remember doing that. The cash drawer matched the transaction when she counted it at 3. I did not argue, so I took a picture of the footprints before I cleaned them. The next morning, the picture was still on my phone. That helped. 4 dark shoe marks beside the cooler. Nothing before them. The second customer came the following Friday. This time, the floor was dry. I was changing pads on the buffer near the stockroom when a woman asked me where the tea was. She was standing beside the bakery rack. Mid-50s, dark blue dress, white cardigan, small black purse. I pointed toward the refrigerated wall. She thanked me and walked away. I had not heard the front doors. That alone no longer meant much. What got my attention was Maya. She was watching the woman too. When the customer brought a bottle of sweet tea to the counter, Maya greeted her. Evening. The woman smiled. Late one for both of us. Maya laughed. The customer used a loyalty card, and the register made the short chirping sound it made when a name came up on the account. Maya glanced at the screen. Thank you, Ms. Hart. The woman looked at her. Lena is fine. Maya said, Have a good night, Lena. The customer left. I waited until the doors closed. You saw her. Maya gave me an irritated look. Of course I saw her. I asked if she had seen the woman enter. She thought about it. No. Then she shrugged. Probably when I was getting ice. The next morning, before I left, I asked Maya about the woman again. She remembered everything. Blue dress, sweet tea, loyalty card, Lena Hart. That seemed important only because 3 nights later, another customer appeared and Maya forgot him. He was younger, maybe 22, with a gray t-shirt and a baseball cap turned backward. I found him at the candy rack while I was replacing a caution cone. He bought a bag of sunflower seeds and an energy drink. Maya rang him up. She asked if he wanted a receipt. He said yes. When she handed it over, he dropped 2 quarters near the counter. I bent down and picked them up. Hey, I said, you dropped these. He turned. I almost called him sir. Instead, for no reason I understood at the time, I asked his name. He frowned. Jonah. Jonah, you dropped your change. He came back and took the coins. Thanks. Then he walked outside. Again, no vehicle. Again, no one had seen him come through the doors. 20 minutes later, I asked Maya what the kid had bought. She looked confused. What kid? I felt the same small pressure behind my ribs that I had felt with the man in the raincoat. I said the name. Jonah. Nothing changed. Maya shook her head. I don't know any Jonah. I remembered him, clearly. Gray shirt, backward cap, sunflower seeds, energy drink, 2 quarters. The difference between Jonah and the man in the raincoat was that I had said Jonah's name while he was still standing there. The difference between Jonah and Lena Hart was that Maya had said Lena's name while Lena was still standing there. I started a notebook. At first, I told myself it was for the job. I wrote down anything that could affect the floor schedule, deliveries, spills, customers who tracked in mud, which aisle I had finished at what time. Then, in the back, I made a separate list. Tan raincoat, root beer, name unknown, Lena Hart, sweet tea. Remembered by Maya, Jonah, seeds, and energy drink. Remembered, by me. The next strange customer arrived on a Wednesday at 2:47. I never saw him enter. Neither did Maya. He was already sitting at the little two-seat counter by the coffee station when I looked up from the mop sink. He was a heavy-set man with a shaved head and a green work shirt. He had a paper cup in both hands. I went over and asked whether he needed anything. "No," he said. "Just waiting a minute." I asked what his name was. That was not something I normally did with customers, and I knew it sounded strange. He did not seem surprised. "Andrew Briggs," I repeated it. "Andrew." His eyes moved to my face. For the first time since the odd customers had started appearing, I had the feeling that one of them understood more than I did. "Good," he said. I asked what was good. He looked down at the coffee. "Nothing." Maya came over to wipe the counter. I introduced him. "Maya, this is Andrew." She looked at me as if I were being unusually social. Then she nodded toward him. "Andrew." He smiled. "Ma'am." After he left, I waited. At 3:30, Maya still remembered him. At 5, she remembered him. On Friday night, when I asked about Andrew Briggs, she told me he had been the man in the green shirt. That was the first rule we found. If you said one of their names while they were present, you remembered them after they left. If you did not, the memory thinned quickly. It did not disappear instantly. Maya said the unnamed customers felt like dreams she had almost remembered when she woke up. She knew something had happened. She might remember standing at the register or opening the drawer. But the person themselves was missing from the memory. I asked whether she remembered the man in the tan raincoat. She rubbed her forehead. "No." Then she said, "I remember you asking me about him." That was all. We checked the cameras. The strange customers appeared on some of them and not others. Andrew Briggs looked normal on every camera except the entrance view. On that one, the doors never opened. Maya stopped believing it was exhaustion. I stopped believing it was a camera problem. What I still believed was that the customers were playing some kind of trick. That may sound ridiculous, but tricks are easier to accept than rules. A sheriff's deputy named Carl Henson came in around midnight the next Friday. Maya asked if he knew the name. Carl said there had been a Briggs family outside Mariana years ago, but he did not remember an Andrew. While we were talking, Andrew walked into the coffee area. Or appeared there. None of us saw the door open. I said his name immediately. "Andrew." Carl turned. Maya did too. Andrew looked tired. He carried a folded newspaper under one arm. I introduced him to Carl. Carl said, "Andrew Briggs?" Andrew nodded. The deputy asked where he was staying. Andrew gave the name of a motel that had closed 6 years earlier. Carl corrected him. Andrew stared at him. Then he gave a small laugh. "I keep forgetting that." He bought coffee and left. Carl watched him walk into the dark parking lot. The following week, Carl came back. Before Maya or I said anything, he asked, "You ever figure out where Andrew Briggs was staying?" He remembered. That made the rule feel less like something happening inside my head. It also made the next question harder. Who were they? Then an older woman appeared near the medicine shelf on the first Monday in August. She wore a lavender blouse and carried no purse. She looked around the store as if she had been there many times. When she saw me, she walked directly over. "Do you remember Andrew?" she asked. I said yes. She seemed relieved. "What's your name?" I asked. Her expression changed. For a few seconds, she did not answer. Then she said, "Evelyn Shore." I repeated it. "Evelyn Shore." Maya was behind the register. I called to her. "Her name is Evelyn." Maya looked over. "Evelyn." The woman closed her eyes briefly. It looked less like fear than exhaustion. I asked why the names mattered. She said, "Because it helps." "With what?" She looked toward the front doors. "Being kept." I did not understand. She would not explain further. She bought a small bottle of aspirin and a packet of crackers. When Maya handed her the receipt, Evelyn folded it twice and put it in the pocket of her blouse. Before leaving, she looked at my cleaning cart. My name was printed on a laminated badge clipped near the handle. Leon Price. "You should make somebody say yours," she said. I laughed. "I'm here 3 nights a week. They know my name." Evelyn looked at Maya. Maya was working on her laptop. Then Evelyn looked back at me. "Do they?" She left. For the rest of the shift, I was irritated with her. That irritation lasted until Friday. I arrived at 12:55 through the rear service door, the way I always did. The cleaning company had a key. I parked beside the dumpster, unloaded pads and chemicals, and let myself into the stockroom without bothering Maya. At 1:30, I passed the register. Maya looked up. "Hey!" I said hello. At 2:10, she asked me a question. "What was your name again?" I stopped the scrubber. I thought she was teasing me. She was not. "Leon." "Right. Sorry." She smiled and went back to her screen. At 3:15, a bread driver came in through the front. I had known him for almost 4 months. His name was Paul. He had once helped me lift the scrubber into the van when the ramp jammed. He walked past me with 2 trays of packaged pastries. "Morning," I said. He nodded. When he returned from the back room, I asked if he could hold the door while I moved a trash barrel. He stared at me for half a second too long. "You with the store?" I felt my mouth go dry. "Cleaning company." "Oh." He held the door. He did not call me Leon. He did not act as if he had ever seen me before. After he left, I took the notebook from my cart. On the first page, I had written my name and phone number in case I lost it. Leon Price. The words were still there. Nothing had changed on the page. That should have comforted me. It did not. The next night, I tested something. When I arrived, I used the front entrance instead of the service door. Maya saw me come in. "Night, Leon." I nearly laughed from relief. She had said my name without being asked. For the next 4 hours, she did not forget it. Paul came in with bread at 3. He recognized me immediately. "Ramp behaving now?" I said yes. The difference was small. It was also clear. Every strange customer had one thing in common. No one saw them arrive. And every night I had worked at Cypress Bell, no one had seen me arrive either. I used the service door behind the stockroom. Maya was usually at the front. The manager had given the cleaning company permission to come and go without checking in. I had spent months entering the building without another person seeing me cross the threshold. That became our second rule. If no one saw you come in, the store could begin to lose you. Not right away, not every time. But after 2 in the morning, during the quietest hours, it seemed to matter. Maya asked why it had taken months to affect me. I did not know. Evelyn Shore had given me an answer I did not want. Maybe being forgotten was easier when your life was already arranged that way. I was staying in a rented room outside West Memphis because it was cheaper than driving home after every shift. I had ignored invitations from friends because I did not want to explain the bankruptcy. I had spent a year making myself difficult to find, then telling myself the quiet was a relief. The store did not create that. It only seemed to notice. For 2 weeks, I came through the front doors. Maya said my name when I arrived. Nothing happened to me. The strange customers still appeared. We learned a few more things. They could leave normally. The door opened for them. The cameras saw at least part of their exit. If we said their names, we remembered them. If we did not, we kept only the outline of the interaction. Some knew what was happening. Most did not. Andrew Briggs returned twice. The second time, I asked him if he was dead. He looked offended. "No," I apologized. Then I asked why nobody saw him come in. He stared toward the windows. "Same reason nobody notices when you stop calling," he said. It was not an explanation. It was close enough that I stopped asking. The last night I worked at Cypress Bell was August 23rd. A thunderstorm had been moving north along the river since evening. By 2, the sky had gone dark purple beyond the pumps. Heat lightning flickered without sound over the fields. Maya was sick. A substitute cashier named Trevor had come in from another store. He had never met me. Rain had already started when I arrived, so I made one stupid exception. I parked by the rear dock and used the service door because it was closer to the van. Trevor did not see me come in. When I reached the front, I introduced myself. Leon Price, floor contractor. Trevor nodded. Got it. He did not repeat my name. That should have bothered me more than it did. At 2:30, the storm reached us. Rain hit the windows hard enough to blur the pumps. The lights flickered once, then twice. The scrubber shut down in the middle of the beverage aisle. I went to the stockroom to reset the charger. When I came back out, Evelyn Shore was standing near the register. I had not seen her arrive. Trevor had not either. I said her name. Evelyn. She looked at me and seemed relieved. Then she looked toward Trevor. Ask him, she said. Ask him what? My name. I turned to the register. Trevor, what's her name? He stared directly at Evelyn, then at me. What woman? Evelyn lowered her eyes. I said her name again. Trevor still saw nobody. That had never happened before. When Maya, Carl, or I said a name, we all remembered the person. But Trevor had not known us long enough to trust what we were saying, and the rule seemed weaker with him. Evelyn stepped closer. You need to go, she told me. I said I had come through the front. She shook her head. Not tonight. The lights flickered again. Trevor looked past me toward the cooler. Sir, are you okay? Sir. Not Leon. I told him my name. He nodded. Right. 30 seconds later, he asked if I was waiting for the cleaning crew. I felt a coldness in my stomach that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I walked around the counter and stood in front of him. Look at me. He did. You know me. You're a customer. No, I'm the floor contractor. He blinked. Then his eyes moved to my uniform shirt as if he had noticed it for the first time. Okay. What's my name? He looked uncomfortable. I don't know. Evelyn said, make him read it. I pulled out my phone. My contact card showed my full name. I held the screen toward Trevor. Read this. He looked at it. Leon Price. The moment he said it, his expression changed. Not dramatically, he simply focused on me. Oh, he said. Leon, right. Sorry, man. I heard the front doors open behind us. A gust of wet air came into the store. Evelyn was walking out. I called her name. Evelyn Shore. She stopped under the canopy and looked back. For a second, I thought she smiled. Then the rain hid her. I did not finish the floor. I shut down the machine, loaded my supplies through the front entrance, and called Randall from the parking lot. He was angry. Cypress Bell was one of our better accounts, and leaving a half-cleaned floor during a storm was not something he considered negotiable. I told him I would not return to that location after midnight. He said if I refused the assignment, he would give the route to someone else. I said I understood. The route paid almost a quarter of my monthly income. I still left. By sunrise, I had lost Cypress Bell and 2 smaller jobs tied to the same route. It took me months to replace the money. I do not regret it. Later, I found a building maintenance job at a community college. The pay was not much better, but people knew when I arrived. There were radios, sign-in sheets, morning meetings, and supervisors who used my name often enough to annoy me. I called one former employee and apologized for disappearing after the company closed. I met another for lunch. I stopped pretending that being hard to reach was the same thing as being independent. Maya left Cypress Bell the next spring. We still exchange messages a few times a year. She told me Trevor never remembered Evelyn Shore. He remembered me after reading my name from the phone, but when Maya later asked about the woman in the lavender blouse, he had no idea who she meant. Andrew Briggs came in once more before Maya quit. She said his name the moment she saw him. He thanked her. Then he bought coffee and left. No one saw him arrive. I kept the notebook from those nights. Most of the names are still clear. Lena Hart, Jonah, Andrew Briggs, Evelyn Shore. There are others I wrote down before I understood the rule. Descriptions without names. A man with a red cap. A woman carrying 2 oranges. Someone who bought a newspaper and never opened it. I know I spoke to them because the details are in my handwriting. I know some of them stood close enough for me to move the cleaning cart out of their way, but I cannot remember their faces. There is one entry near the back that bothers me more than the rest. It is dated 9 days before the storm. The line reads, "Red cap, black coffee, no sugar." Below that, I copied a name from a receipt after the customer had already gone. The ink is still there. I can see every letter. I just cannot remember who it belongs to. The console always lit up before the customer appeared. That was the rule I understood too late. Tideway Market had 6 fuel pumps. The old register console had buttons for 8, but 7 and 8 had been painted over years before I started working there. I had never seen either one light up until a woman's voice came through the speaker at 2:13 on a foggy April morning and asked if she could come inside. I answered her. 3 minutes later, she was standing beside the canned soup. Nobody had seen her enter. I was 43 then, working overnight stock at Tideway Market outside Alder Cove, Oregon. The store sat on a wet stretch of coastal highway where spruce trees leaned over the shoulders, and fog could erase the gas canopy from 50 yards away. There was a motel across the road, a shuttered tackle shop next door, and not much else until you reached town 6 miles north. I did not usually run the register. My job was to unload the late truck, rotate dairy, fill the coolers, break down cardboard, and get the store ready for morning. The night cashier, Jenna Pike, handled customers while I worked the aisles. That suited me. For most of my adult life, I had installed marine radios and navigation equipment on fishing boats. I had done well enough to open a small shop with a friend named Caleb. Then we lost 2 major accounts, took on debt we should not have taken, and spent almost a year pretending the business would recover if we just worked harder. It did not. I closed my half of the company without meeting Caleb in person. I signed what had to be signed, left my key in the mail slot, and stopped answering his calls for 3 months. I was ashamed of that longer than I was ashamed of the money. Night work let me keep to myself. Tideway Market was newer than it looked. The current building had gone up in the late 90s after an older service station on the same lot was demolished. The fuel canopy had been replaced twice. The tanks had been replaced once. Most of the wiring had been updated, but the pump intercom at the register was still an old gray box with square red lights beside each channel. Drivers could press a help button at a pump if the card reader failed or if they needed the clerk to authorize fuel. Jenna hated the sound it made, a flat electronic buzz followed by a click. On the first night, I was stocking soup when the buzz came from the counter. Jenna was in the back office counting cigarettes. The light beside pump 7 was glowing red. I remember staring at it because the number was partly hidden under a strip of old black paint. The speaker clicked. A woman said, "Hello, is somebody there?" I stepped behind the register. "Yeah," I said. "Can I help you?" There was a pause. Then she said, "Can I come inside? I can't see the door from here." I looked through the windows. Fog pressed against the glass in pale sheets. The canopy lights made bright circles around pumps 1 through 6. There was no 7th island. No person stood near the building. I assumed the signal was crossing from another pump. "The entrance is on the north side," I said. "You're fine. Come on in." The speaker clicked off. Jenna came out of the office carrying a bundle of receipts. "Who were you talking to?" I told her somebody at a pump. She glanced at the console. All the lights were dark. I went back to the soup aisle. Maybe 3 minutes passed. I was kneeling beside a carton of tomato soup when I saw a pair of shoes on the other side of the shelf. Brown loafers, dark slacks. I stood up. A woman in her late 50s was reading the labels on the canned vegetables. She wore a cream raincoat buttoned at the front, and there were tiny beads of moisture in her short gray hair. I had not heard the automatic doors. Jenna had not called a greeting. The woman looked at me. "Do you have batteries?" she asked. I pointed toward the front aisle. She thanked me and walked to the rack near the register. Jenna rang up 4 AA batteries and a bottle of water. While the woman searched her purse, Jenna asked which pump she was on. The woman looked confused. "I'm not getting gas." "Did somebody drop you off?" "No." Jenna looked toward the windows. There were no cars in the lot except Jenna's Subaru and my pickup behind the dumpster fence. The woman paid cash. Before she left, I asked if she had used the pump intercom. She frowned. "What intercom?" I told her I had spoken to a woman a few minutes earlier. She gave me a polite smile. Wasn't me. The automatic doors opened for her. The entrance chime sounded. We watched her walk into the fog. She passed beyond the first pump and disappeared. Jenna waited almost a minute, then went outside. She came back with her arms folded tight against the damp air. "No car," she said. We checked the cameras. There were 4 of them inside and 2 outside. At 2:12, the store was empty, except for us. At 2:13, I walked behind the counter and leaned toward the intercom. The camera had no audio, but we could see the red light on the console. At 2:16, I was back in the soup aisle. The woman was already standing on the other side of the shelf. There was no frame of her entering. The entrance camera showed the doors closed the entire time. Jenna blamed the recording system. I blamed the fog. Neither explanation accounted for the woman standing inside. The next afternoon, our manager, Paul Reyes, checked the intercom. He had managed 3 Tideway locations and knew enough about fuel equipment to be impatient with mystery. He scraped the black paint away from 7 and 8. The buttons underneath were intact. "Old console," he said. "Probably cheaper to leave it than replace it." He pressed 7. Nothing happened. He opened the panel below the register and traced the cable bundle as far as he could. Channels 1 through 6 had labeled wires. 7 and 8 did not. Paul said the lights could still ghost from voltage in the board. That was good enough for me. For 11 nights, nothing happened. Then pump 7 lit again. This time, Jenna heard it. We were both behind the counter at 1:56 in the morning. Rain had been falling since sunset, steady and light, tapping against the metal awning over the side door. The console buzzed. 7 glowed red. A man's voice came through the speaker. "Is the coffee still on?" Jenna and I looked at each other. I did not answer. The speaker crackled. "Hello?" Jenna reached for the talk button. I stopped her. We waited. After about 10 seconds, the light went dark. Nobody appeared. That was the first part of the rule. If we did not answer, nothing happened. We tested it 2 nights later. At 3:24, 7 lit up, and a young man asked if we sold phone chargers. We said nothing. The light went dark after 12 seconds. The store remained empty. Jenna wrote the time on a receipt and taped it under the counter. 4 nights later, the console buzzed again. A woman asked whether the restroom was open. This time, I answered without thinking. "Yes, it's in the back on the left." Jenna turned toward me. "What are you doing?" I felt foolish immediately. We watched the doors. Nothing moved. 2 minutes later, the restroom door opened. A woman stepped out. Neither of us had seen her go in. She was about 35, wearing hospital scrubs under a black coat. Her hair was wet from rain. She walked to the counter and bought gum. Jenna asked if she worked at the clinic in Alder Cove. The woman said she was driving to Tillamook. I asked how long she had been in the restroom. She looked at me as if the question was too personal. A minute? Did you come through the front door? Of course. Jenna asked if she had used the intercom outside. The woman looked toward the pumps. No. There was no vehicle outside. When she left, we followed her to the entrance. She walked past pump 2 and into the rain. The highway shoulder was empty in both directions. That was when Jenna stopped joking about bad wiring. We made a rule of our own. If 7 lit up, we did not answer. For almost 3 weeks, that worked. We heard 6 voices. A man asking for a restroom key. A woman asking if we carried baby aspirin. Someone who only said, "You open?" Once a child's voice asked if the lights inside were supposed to be blue. We never answered. No one appeared. Then Paul found the receipts Jenna had taped under the counter. She told him the truth. He did not laugh. He looked irritated, which was different. Paul was responsible for fuel compliance. An electrical fault in a pump control system was not something he could ignore once employees reported it. He called a service company in Newport. A technician named Marcus came out the next morning. Marcus was in his 60s and had spent most of his career working on service stations along the coast. He removed the intercom console and set it face down on the counter. The wiring behind it surprised him. Channels 1 through 6 ran into a modern interface board. Channels 7 and 8 were connected to 2 old copper pairs that disappeared into the wall. Paul said they should be dead. Marcus tested them. 8 was dead. 7 carried a weak signal. Not enough for a normal circuit. Just a low changing voltage that came and went every few seconds. Marcus asked where the line terminated. Nobody knew. He traced it through the back room, across the ceiling, and into a conduit that went underground behind the building. The conduit was older than the store. Paul pulled out the site plans. The line did not appear on them. Marcus said old stations sometimes had separate intercoms for service bays, air pumps, or attendant islands. He guessed the cable had belonged to the station that stood there before Tideway Market. He disconnected Channel 7 at the console. Then he capped the wires. For the first time in weeks, I slept well during the day. The next night, at 2:11, the console buzzed. 7 lit red. The wires were still disconnected. Jenna and I stood behind the counter without moving. A man's voice came through the speaker. "Can you hear me now?" Jenna whispered. "Don't answer." I did not. The light went dark. At 7, we called Marcus. He came back before noon. The capped wires were exactly as he had left them. He removed the entire Channel 7 contact from the board. That meant, according to him, there was no physical path for 7 to light or produce audio. Before leaving, he put a small digital recorder beside the console. "If it happens again," he said, "let this run." It happened 2 nights later. The recorder captured everything. The buzz, the click. A woman saying, "I just need somewhere warm for a few minutes." Jenna and I did not answer. No customer appeared. Marcus listened to the file the next morning. Then he asked us to play it again. He was not interested in the woman's words. He was listening to the sound behind her voice. There was a bell, very faint. 2 quick metal notes, then 1 longer one. Marcus listened 3 times. "I know that sound," he said. He had heard it when he was young. The old service station on the property had once used a driveway bell. A rubber hose ran across the entrance lane. When a car drove over it, air pressure triggered a bell inside the station, so the attendant knew someone had pulled in. Those systems were common before self-service became standard. Marcus said the old station had kept one longer than most. He remembered because he had serviced the place as an apprentice. I asked how many pump islands it had. He thought for a moment. 7, I think. Paul found an old property photo through the county assessor's office. The picture was from 1989. The old station was smaller than Tideway Market, with 2 service bays and a narrow office facing the highway. There were 7 pumps. The 7th stood near the south edge of the lot, where our dumpster enclosure was now. A black hose crossed the driveway beside it. That gave us an explanation we could almost live with. Channel 7 was old equipment tied somehow to the previous station. The voices were harder to explain, but at least the number had a history. Then Marcus noticed something in the photograph. The building's customer entrance had been on the south side, not where our doors were now. The old entrance had stood almost exactly where aisle 3 ran through the current store. The soup aisle, the place where I had first seen the woman in the cream raincoat. Jenna stopped volunteering for extra nights after that. I kept working them, partly because I needed the money, partly because the rules still seemed manageable. Do not answer 7. No answer. No customer. Then, one night in June, the voice on 7 said my name. I was alone at the counter because Jenna had gone outside to help an elderly driver with the air machine. The buzz sounded at 2:48. I looked at the console. 7 glowed. A man said, "Nate?" That was my name. I did not touch the button. The voice came again. "Nate, it's Caleb." I felt my hand close around the edge of the counter. Caleb was alive. I knew that. We had not spoken in almost 2 years, but I had seen his name on a marine repair company's website in Astoria. He had moved north after our business closed. The speaker crackled. "Pick up." I looked through the windows. Jenna was still outside near the air machine. No one else was in the lot. I should have stayed quiet. Instead, I pressed the talk button. "Caleb." The line went silent. Then he said, "You finally answered." The light went dark. I stood there, waiting. 1 minute, 2, 3. Jenna came back inside. I told her what had happened. She did not need me to explain the rest. We watched the aisles. At 2:53, a man walked out from behind the chip display. Caleb. He was older than the last time I had seen him. His beard had more gray in it. He wore a dark canvas jacket with the logo of the Astoria Company stitched over the chest. He saw me and stopped. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled in a tired way. "You look different." I asked how he had gotten there. He looked around. Drove. There was no vehicle outside. Jenna quietly moved away from the counter. Caleb picked up a bottle of iced tea. I asked why he had called me on the intercom. He frowned. "I didn't. You said my name. I just got here." I told him the store was 6 miles from Alder Cove and more than 100 miles from Astoria. His expression changed. Not fear. Confusion. He pulled out his phone. The screen showed no service. He looked at the time. Then he looked at me. "I was at home 10 minutes ago." Jenna heard that. Caleb sat down on a case of bottled water near the counter. He said he had been in his kitchen, packing lunch for the next day. His phone had rung from a number he did not recognize. He answered. Nobody spoke. He heard a buzzing sound. Then a voice said, "Can you come inside?" Caleb thought it was me. He said yes. The next thing he remembered was standing beside the chip display at Tideway Market. That was the first time we understood the rule had 2 sides. We had believed Channel 7 was asking permission for customers to enter our store. It was not. Sometimes it was asking them to. Caleb wanted to leave immediately. I did not stop him. The doors opened normally. He stepped outside. The parking lot was empty. His phone regained service near Pump 1. He called a ride share, but there were no drivers close enough. Eventually, Jenna gave him a ride to a motel in town after her shift. The next morning, I drove him north to a bus station. We spent 2 hours in my pickup together. At first, we talked about the store. Then there was nothing left to say about it. So we talked about the business. I apologized for disappearing. Caleb did not tell me it was fine. I am glad he did not. He said closing the shop had hurt less than the way I made him finish it alone. He had dealt with the landlord, returned equipment, called customers, and explained to employees why their final checks were late. I had left him every conversation I could not bear to have. There was no supernatural lesson in that, just an ordinary fact I should have faced years earlier. Before he got on the bus, Caleb gave me his number, the same number he had always had. I had never deleted it. I simply had not used it. After that, I told Paul I would not work alone near the console. He agreed to replace the entire intercom system, not repair it, replace it. The new equipment went in 3 weeks later. The old gray box was removed from the counter and taken apart in the parking lot before disposal. Channel 7 had no contact, no wire, and no place on the new board. For almost 2 months, nothing happened. Then I moved to day shift. Caleb and I spoke occasionally after that. Not often. We were not going to become business partners again or pretend the years in between had disappeared. But when he called, I answered. I left Tideway Market the following spring and took a job with a marine electronics company in Newport. The work was familiar. So was the discomfort of talking to people I had avoided. I got better at it slowly. Jenna stayed at Tideway another year. She called me one night in October after the store had closed temporarily because a windstorm knocked out power along the highway. The pumps were off. The registers were dark. The new intercom had no battery backup. She was inside with Paul waiting for the utility company when they heard a flat electronic buzz from beneath the counter. There was nothing there anymore except a metal plate covering the hole where the old console had been. Then came a click. A man's voice said very clearly, "Is somebody there?" Neither of them answered. They waited in the dark for almost 20 minutes. No one appeared. Paul left the metal plate in place when the power came back. As far as I know, it is still there. I drove past Tideway Market this summer on my way north. The store has been repainted. The old tackle shop next door is a coffee stand now. The dumpster enclosure has been moved to the opposite side of the property. Where it used to stand, near the place the old photograph showed Pump 7, there is a narrow patch of bare concrete. Someone has painted a small yellow number on it, 7. The first man who appeared without using the door asked me how far he had walked. I thought he meant from the highway. Then he turned and pointed toward the dairy coolers. From there, he said. There was nothing behind him except 6 glass refrigerator doors, a painted cinder block wall, and a narrow strip of tile I had mopped less than 10 minutes earlier. I told him the restrooms were on the other side of the store. He looked at the coolers again. That isn't where I went in. I was 46 that fall, working the overnight shift at Prairie Lantern Market outside a small town called Morrow Creek, Nebraska. The store sat near an old state highway that had lost most of its traffic after the interstate was widened. We still got truckers, farm crews, college kids cutting across the state, and people who simply needed coffee before another 50 miles of dark road. The building had been expanded more than once. The front half was newer, with bright tile, low shelves, and a glass entrance facing the pumps. The back half was older. The stockroom ceiling was lower. Pipes ran exposed above the mop sink. Some walls were thicker than they had any reason to be. I knew that because I had helped paint them. My manager, Carl, liked to say the store had been 3 different businesses before it became Prairie Lantern. A truck service station in the 60s, a travel stop with a diner in the 70s, then a discount gas station after the diner closed. By the time I started there, all that remained was the convenience store and a concrete slab behind the building where the diner kitchen had once stood. I took nights because they paid $2 more an hour and because my daughter and I had reached the point where talking in person usually made things worse. Her name was Megan. She was 23 and living in Colorado by then. We had not stopped speaking. We simply had a talent for turning ordinary conversations into evidence against each other. She thought I had spent most of her childhood choosing work over everything else. I thought I had spent it keeping the lights on. Both things could be true. The man by the dairy coolers appeared at 2:47 on a Thursday in September. I had been cleaning the hot chocolate machine when I heard the refrigerator door close behind me. That was all. No entrance chime, no tires outside, no engine under the canopy. He looked about 35, blue work shirt, black jeans. baseball cap with a seed company logo. He was holding a small package of cheese crackers, but he seemed more interested in the store than the food. "Where am I?" he asked. I told him Morrow Creek. He smiled like he thought I was joking. "What county?" I told him. His smile disappeared. He set the crackers down. "I'm supposed to be in Kearney." Kearney was more than an hour away. I asked if somebody had dropped him off. He said no. He had stopped at a convenience store on the east side of Kearney because he needed a restroom. He remembered walking down a short hallway past a soda machine. He opened the restroom door. Instead of a restroom, he said, there was another hallway. He assumed he had opened the wrong door. He walked through it, turned left where he saw light, and came out beside our dairy coolers. I looked at the wall behind him. There was no hallway. I asked if he had been drinking. He laughed once. Then he took out his phone. The screen showed 2:49. There were 4 missed calls from someone listed as Tara. He called her while standing at my register. I could hear enough of the conversation to understand that she was not amused. His truck was still parked outside the Kearney store. She was sitting in the passenger seat. She wanted to know why he had been in the restroom for 12 minutes. He told her he was in Morrow Creek. There was a long silence. Then she asked him to stop messing around. He turned the phone toward me and asked if I would tell her where he was. I did. She asked for the store name. I gave it to her. He sat on the floor beside the coffee island after that. Not because he was sick. He just seemed to need something solid underneath him. I called Carl. Carl answered because he had 2 children under 5 and rarely slept through the night anyway. I told him a customer claimed he had entered the building through the dairy wall. Carl was quiet for a few seconds. Then he asked the question I expected. "Is he high?" I said. I did not think so. Carl told me to check the cameras. The front cameras showed no one entering between 2:30 and 2:50. The side door had not opened. The stockroom camera showed me carrying a box of cups at 2:45, then returning to the register. The dairy aisle camera was mounted above the beer cooler and pointed across the back half of the store. At 2:46:52, the aisle was empty. At 2:46:53, the man was standing beside the milk. There was no blur, no missing timestamp. He did not walk into frame. He was simply there. Carl came in before 3:30. By then, Tara had started driving west from Kearney to get the man. Carl watched the footage twice. Then he walked to the dairy wall and knocked on it with his knuckles. Solid block. We moved 2 shelves away from the wall and checked for panels. Nothing. The man stayed until Tara arrived a little after 4. When she came through the front door, she looked angry first. Then she saw him. She asked where his truck was. He said, "Still where I left it." She did not argue after that. Before they left, the man asked me if I had seen the hallway. I said no. He looked toward the dairy coolers. "It had green tile," he said. "Old kind, little square ones." That detail stayed with me. The next morning, Carl called the store in Kearney. He did not tell them the full story. He only asked whether a man had gone missing from their restroom around 2:35. The clerk said yes. They had checked both stalls after the man's girlfriend complained. Nobody was inside. Their security video showed him walking down the restroom hall at 2:34. It never showed him coming back. For almost 2 weeks, nothing else happened. Carl had a contractor inspect the wall behind the dairy cases. The contractor found old electrical conduit, 1 capped water line, and nothing large enough for a person to pass through. He did find something else. Behind 1 cooler, hidden by insulation board, there was a patch of small green ceramic tile, 2 inches square. Carl called me into the store on my day off to look at it. The tiles were faded and cracked. They continued behind the cooler frame where we could not see them. Carl said the old diner kitchen might have used the same tile. That seemed reasonable. The man in Kearney had probably seen a picture online, or he had guessed. I accepted that explanation because I wanted one. The second customer appeared on the first cold night of October. Her name was Bethany Rowe. I learned it because she showed me her driver's license before I asked. She was 61, wearing a long tan sweater and soft house shoes with rubber soles. She had no coat. At 3:06, I heard a woman cough near the bread rack. I looked up and saw her standing there with both hands pressed against her chest. The entrance had not chimed. The parking lot was empty. She asked if I could call an ambulance. I came around the counter. She was breathing normally, but she was shaking. I asked if she was hurt. She said, "No, I'm in the wrong building." She had been driving home outside Salina, Kansas, when she stopped at a 24-hour store. She went inside, bought a bottle of water, and asked to use the restroom. She remembered opening a door with a blue women's sign. There was a narrow passage beyond it, green tile on the walls, a humming fluorescent light. At the far end, she saw a glowing red exit sign. She walked toward it because she thought the restroom had another door. The passage turned once. Then she came through a doorway and found herself beside our bread rack. The problem was that the wall beside our bread rack had no door either. I did not call an ambulance. I called the store in Kansas. The overnight clerk sounded frightened before I finished explaining. Bethany's car was still outside. Her purse was on the restroom sink. The stall was empty. I put the call on speaker. Bethany listened without speaking. Then she asked the clerk to check whether her glasses were beside the sink. They were. Bethany touched her face. She had not realized she was not wearing them. Carl arrived again. This time, he did not ask whether the customer was drunk. He brought an old folder from his office. Inside were photocopies of building plans. The oldest plan was from 1978, when the property had been called Plains Traveler Service. The diner had occupied the back half of the current store. A public restroom corridor had run along the north wall. The walls on the plan were marked with a finish code, G-2. A note in the margin identified G-2 as green ceramic tile. The corridor did not line up perfectly with the current building. Part of it would have passed through the dairy cases. Another section would have ended near the bread rack. Carl said that explained the tile. It did not explain Bethany. Her son drove up from Kansas City to get her that afternoon. She refused to walk near the back wall while she waited. Before leaving, she said something I did not understand until later. There were other doors in there. I asked how many. I don't know, 4, maybe 5. They had store signs on them. What kind of signs? Restroom signs, employee only. One said ice. Then she said the door she had come through had our store logo on it. Prairie Lantern. Carl and I did not tell anyone else. That was partly practical. People still needed to buy gasoline. Employees still needed jobs. The owner lived in Omaha and treated every problem as either theft, maintenance, or staffing. There was no category for a hallway that seemed to connect unrelated convenience stores at night. We made one change. Carl mounted a second camera facing the dairy wall. For 12 nights, it recorded nothing unusual. Then a teenager appeared at 2:58, carrying a fountain drink from a chain store we did not have anywhere near Morrow Creek. He was 17. He had stopped with 2 friends outside Sioux City. He went inside to refill his drink and use the restroom. He opened the wrong door. Green hallway, fluorescent light, several doors. He tried the first one. Locked. Second one. Locked. The third opened beside our dairy coolers. His friends called his phone while he was talking to me. They thought he had climbed out a window. Their store had no restroom windows. That customer gave us the first useful piece of information. He had taken a picture inside the hallway. Not on purpose. He had been filming himself for his friends because he thought he had found an old service corridor. The video lasted 11 seconds. Most of it showed his face and the ceiling. Then he turned the phone. Green tile. A gray floor. 5 doors. Each door was different. Different handles, different paint. different signs. One looked new and had a red plastic employees only sign. One was metal with a push bar. One had a faded blue restroom symbol. The last door at the end of the passage was beige. On it was a small oval logo, Prairie Lantern Market. Carl paused the video. The logo was ours, but not the current one. It was the logo the store had used before a remodel in 2006. I remembered it from old uniforms in the office cabinet. The teenager's video ended when he opened that door. On the next frame, he was standing in our store. No transition, no camera glitch. Green tile became dairy coolers. We sent the video to ourselves and told him not to delete it. He laughed nervously and said there was no chance of that. After he left, Carl and I watched the clip until sunrise. We noticed one more thing. At the 7-second mark, something moved behind the farthest door. Not a person, just light. For an instant, the gap beneath the door brightened, then went dark. Carl decided we needed to know whether anyone could go the other direction. I told him that was a bad idea. He agreed. Then we tried anyway. We waited until the following night between 2:30 and 3:30. Nothing happened. The next night, nothing. On the third night at 2:51, the fluorescent tube above the dairy aisle flickered once. The cooler compressors shut off at the same moment. The store became quiet enough that I could hear the ice machine dripping into its tray. The convex security mirror mounted above the beer case showed something that was not in the aisle. A doorway. It appeared in the mirror behind me. I turned around. There was only the wall. I looked back at the mirror. The doorway was still there. Beige door. Old Prairie Lantern logo. Carl stood beside me and saw it too. He took one step toward the dairy wall. In the mirror, his reflection moved toward the door. In the store, he moved toward solid cinder block. When he reached out, his hand touched the wall. In the mirror, his hand touched the door handle. He pulled back immediately. The fluorescent light flickered again. The doorway disappeared from the mirror. The compressors started. Carl removed the mirror the next morning. He put it in the office facing the wall. For a month, there were no strange customers. I started to believe the mirror had been part of it. Then, in November, a man appeared near the freezer carrying a receipt from a store in Wyoming. He had not seen a hallway. He said he had opened a walk-in cooler door at work and stepped out beside our frozen pizzas. The pattern was wider than restrooms. Doors in convenience stores. Doors near back halls. Doors used late at night when no one else was watching. Somehow, for a few minutes at a time, they led through the old green corridor. Carl began keeping a map. Kearney, Salina, Sioux City, Casper. Later, Des Moines. Then a small town in northern Colorado. Every customer arrived between 2:40 and 3:10 in the morning. Everyone described the same green tile. Everyone said there were several doors. None could explain why they chose the door that brought them to us. The false answer we settled on was that Prairie Lanterns sat at the center of whatever was happening. The old corridor had once been physically there. Maybe the building remembered it. Maybe every other door somehow connected to this one place because this was where the passage had originally existed. That explanation lasted until the night Megan appeared. It was December 15th. There had been light snow after midnight, just enough to whiten the edges of the parking lot. I had not spoken to her in 17 days. Our last call had ended badly. She had asked whether I planned to visit her for Christmas. I said I could not get enough days off. She said, "Of course you can't." I told her that was unfair. She said, "It is also always true." Then we stopped talking. At 2:55 that morning, the cooler compressors shut off. The light above dairy flickered. I looked toward the wall before I looked anywhere else. Nothing. Then I heard a paper cup hit the floor behind the register. I turned. Megan was standing beside the cigarette cabinet. She wore a gray winter coat and one black glove. The other hand was bare. For a second, Neither of us moved. She looked at me like I had done something impossible on purpose. "Mom?" I came around the counter. I asked if she was hurt. She shook her head. Then she started crying in the quiet way she had cried as a child, without making much sound. She had been driving home from a late shift in Fort Collins. She stopped at a convenience store north of the city for coffee. Before leaving, she went to the restroom. She opened the door. Green tile. She thought the store was being remodeled. She walked toward a door at the far end because she could hear a refrigeration unit humming beyond it. The door had no sign. When she opened it, she was behind my register in Nebraska. Her car was still in Colorado. Her phone had no service for almost a minute after she arrived, then suddenly found a signal. She called the store where she had stopped. The clerk answered. Her coffee was still on the restroom counter. Her car was still outside. Carl came in at 3:20. He looked at Megan, then at me. He did not ask for an explanation. He brought the convex mirror out of the office. We waited. At 3:07, the fluorescent light flickered again. The mirror showed the beige door. This time, the door was open. Beyond it was the green hallway. Megan saw it. "That's it," she said. She stepped toward the wall. I caught her sleeve. "Don't." "My car is there." "Your car can stay there." She looked at me. "I have to work tomorrow." "You can call Mom." It was such a normal argument that I almost laughed. Carl did not. He pointed at the mirror. At the far end of the green hallway, another door had opened. Through it, we could see part of a store, not ours. Blue floor mats, red counter, a rack of windshield fluid. A man in a dark jacket stood near the opening. He looked toward us. Then he walked through his door into the hallway. Megan took a step back. The man came closer. He was holding a plastic bag and a set of car keys. He reached the beige prairie lantern door. In the mirror, he stepped through. In our store, nobody appeared. The doorway closed behind him. The hallway remained visible for 3 more seconds. Then the mirror reflected only shelves again. We never found out where that man went. That was enough for Megan. She sat behind the counter until sunrise. At 7, we called a towing company in Colorado and arranged for her car to be moved somewhere secure. She rented a car the next afternoon and drove back. Before she left, we had breakfast at the diner in Morrow Creek. We did not repair years of arguments over eggs and coffee. We did talk longer than we had in months. She told me there were times when she needed me to admit that work had cost us something. I told her there were times when I needed her to understand that I had not known another way to keep us afloat. Neither sentence solved the other one. That helped. Carl closed the store from 2:30 to 3:30 for the rest of December. The owner hated it. Carl blamed electrical work. In January, the owner finally approved a full renovation of the back wall. The dairy cases were removed. Workers opened the cinder block. Behind it, they found the old green tile corridor. Not all of it, only 8 feet. It had been sealed at both ends during a remodel decades earlier. There were no doors, no junctions, no passage wide enough to reach the rest of the building. On one wall, under layers of paint, someone had written 5 store names in pencil. Kearney Quick Mart, Sunline Fuel, Selena. North River Stop, Sioux City. A store in Casper, and Prairie Lantern. 3 of those names matched places our customers had come from. The 4th store in Casper had changed names years earlier. The handwriting looked old. The contractor thought it had been left by a traveling maintenance crew. Carl did not argue. The corridor was demolished. The green tiles went into a dumpster. The wall was rebuilt with new block and steel framing. We put the dairy cases back. No strange customers appeared for the rest of winter. I left Prairie Lantern the next spring. Not because of the hallway. Megan had asked me to come to Colorado for a week after she moved apartments. I requested the time off. The owner denied it because another clerk had already taken vacation. For once, I did not look for a way around that answer. I quit. I found a daytime job at a farm supply warehouse 2 months later. The pay was a little worse. I slept at night. Megan and I still argue. We are better at stopping before every old complaint becomes part of the same conversation. Carl stayed at Prairie Lantern until the store was sold in 2024. The new company replaced the sign, the register system, and most of the coolers. They also threw away the old convex mirror. Carl took it home before the dumpster was hauled off. He keeps it in his garage. Last December, he sent me a picture at 2:52 in the morning. The mirror was hanging above his workbench. His garage was empty. In the reflection, behind his truck, there was a narrow hallway with green tile. 5 doors stood along the wall. The one at the far end was open. Above it was a red exit sign. Carl did not take another picture.